Okay, so now that you know how to pick the best quality produce, it's now time to kind of know what to do with it. So whether you're kind of wanting to make a recipe, or if you're wanting to preserve or prepare your produce to preserve them and store them for later use, I'm going to show you a few tips that I use to help you with all of that. So first and foremost, before we get into any of the cutting, chopping, slicing, all of that, we first want to make sure we have clean hands. This just prevents any contamination or anything like that. So please wash your hands for 20 seconds, sing happy birthday or your ABCs, and just make sure you have clean hands. After you're done with that, make sure you get a clean cutting board. And only use this for the produce. Don't use one that you've cut meat on or anything like that, because again, if we do that, you'll be contaminating your produce. So just get a clean cutting board that you're only using for your produce. And also what you will need a chef's knife that looks like this, or you can also use a paring knife. And so the knife just kind of depends on the size of produce that you're cutting. So if you're cutting a smaller piece of produce item, you can use a paring knife. And if you're using a larger item, or if you're cutting a larger item, you can use the chef's knife. And then before you get to cutting, if you feel more comfortable, you can put a damp cloth down or a damp paper towel down underneath your cutting board, just to make sure that the cutting board isn't sliding around or anything. What we are going to be talking about today, I'm going to be showing you a few different cutting techniques. Because if you're reading recipes, or again, if you're cutting up your produce, you need to know how to cut the produce. And so you'll see different things in recipes, chopping, slicing, mincing, but maybe you don't know what that means. So I'm going to show you. So first we're going to start off with chopping. Okay, so chopping, the pieces they don't have to be perfectly uniform pieces. They can just be kind of chunky pieces, if you will. So how we're going to do this, here today I have a cucumber. You can chop potatoes, you can chop some apples, like any of the larger produce items. But typically what I do with a cucumber when I'm chopping, I will slice it right down the middle. Okay, and then when you're chopping rounded vegetables, you always want to make sure that the flat side is down to prevent any cutting your fingers or anything like that. So now we're going to slice it again down the middle. And then what we're going to do now is just kind of, so when you're cutting, you want to make sure that the knife, the pointy end of the knife is down on the cutting board, and you just kind of want to make a nice rocking motion back and forth. Okay, again, these pieces don't have to be uniform. They can just be kind of however chunky style. You can see they're very chunky, and so that's how you can chop your vegetables. So the second cutting technique that we're going to be talking about today is dicing. This is very commonly used in recipes, especially if you're dicing onions, celery, or carrots for soups and stuff. With dicing, typically they are in uniform small square pieces. Some recipes may say cut it to 1/8 of an inch, but what does that mean? I don't know. So just cut it in small square pieces. So I'm going to continue using a cucumber. Again, typically you dice onions, celery, and carrots. But what I'm going to do, how I'm going to dice this, again, make sure the pointy end of the knife is down on the cutting board and you go back in rocking motions. So I am going to cut it lengthwise in strips, okay? Just like this. Again, make sure your fingertips are out of the way so we don't have an accident. I'm going to hold it this way. All right. And then I'm going to, some of these are a little bigger, so I'm just gonna kind of cut them down the middle in half to make them smaller square pieces. That way. Doesn't have to be perfect, just kind of, again, those smaller pieces, that's what we're going for. And we're cutting these in these smaller pieces because, again, like, we want to make sure that the you know, the onions, celery, or whatever you're dicing up, it gets very tender in the recipe, and cooks evenly. Now you can also dice the produce items to preserve later for storage, which Allison will be talking about later. So I'm just going to grab a bunch, and I'm just going to cut them in small squares like this, dice them up, have a few getting away from me. Again, I'm just kind of going back and forth in that rocking motion. And you can see these small square pieces forming. All right. Okay, so the next cutting technique that we will be covering today is mincing. So typically when you mince, again, we are chopping them in fine, very small pieces, so even smaller than dicing. And these are typically used for when you're cutting up garlic or onions too, because those are very fragrant flavors, and so we're trying to chop them up real small so we can still add them to a dish, but they're not overpowering. Okay, so I'm going to, again, I'm sticking with the cucumber, but I just pretend it's a garlic, a clove here. But so you're going to start off kind of dicing, but then very small pieces. Nothing has to be perfect. So we're just going to chop it up real fine here. And sometimes, now this won't happen with the cucumber, but when you're chopping up like the garlic or something, it may turn into like a ginger paste, or not a ginger paste, like a paste like a consistency, and that's supposed to happen. But what you can also do, and what I like to do to get it even smaller, I'll put the pointy end of the knife on the cutting board, put my hand on it to secure it more, but I'll kind of just go back and forth and chop up like this, and this just gets it into smaller pieces to get that mince cut. Okay, you can kind of see the smaller pieces are forming here. All right, and that is how you mince. So the next cutting technique we will be doing is slicing. This is very common. I'm sure many of you have sliced something before, but if not, that's okay. We're going to learn today. It's one of the easier ones to do, and so I'm going to do a cucumber, and slicing cucumbers is real easy. You can also slice some oranges or squash, zucchini to get the nice round shapes. And you can slice things if you're wanting to roast anything in the oven or anything like that. So what we're going to do, I have this whole cucumber. It is chopped up a little bit already, but again, make sure the end of the knife is pointing down, and we are just going to cut it crosswise. Okay, so we get those nice round shapes. Just going to go back and forth in the rocking motion to get those nice slices. Try to cut them in evenly slices, so you know, like the same shapes as much as you can, but it doesn't have to be perfect. All right, and there you have it. That is how you slice. The last cutting technique we will cover today is called the julienne. Fancy, I know, but it's not too difficult. Julienne is just a fancy way of cutting things into long strips. So kind of think of a French fry. French fry, that is the shape that we are going to form today. So you can I use this technique for potatoes, carrots, if you're wanting to cut up some carrot sticks for like a salad, or if you want to make some squash fries. Okay, I have this squash in front of me, and this is what I'm going to use to demonstrate the julienne cuts. So starting whole, we have this squash. To make it easier, I'm going to cut it in half, so kind of like that slicing technique that we were talking about earlier. I'm going to set that half aside, and then I'm going to move it. Well, first let me cut off the end. We don't want to eat the end part. I am going to now cut it lengthwise, just easier to do that way. Remember, put the flat side on the cutting board to prevent injury. And now what we're going to do, what I always do, I always cut down again the middle. It just helps me be even with things. And you're going to continue cutting this way, lengthwise, kind of like cutting sheets, if you will. So kind of like sheets, making sheet forms. All right. Okay. All right, so we have our sheets that look like this. And then now we're just going to cut them into sticks, okay? I'm just going to do one at a time. Up. All right. And I'm using the same motion that I've been using, the rocking back and forth, cutting them into nice long strips. These would be great if you put some olive oil on them, flavor it with some garlic powder, onion powder, preheat the oven to 350 or 375, cook them in the oven for 30 to 45-ish minutes, and you have some squash fries. So that is the julienne cuts. So those are all of the cutting techniques for today. So hopefully you learned a little something new, and hopefully now when you do your recipe or are wanting to preserve your produce for later, you now kind of have a better idea of how to cut the produce.
So make sure you come out and join us from 10 to 1 every Friday.
Eat, Move, Save.